you see it?
2025 has delivered some of the most extraordinary and controversial Bigfoot evidence ever captured on camera. From remote wilderness areas to suburban backyards, these encounters have left experts baffled.
Seeing some movement. Yeah, something's moving across the screen right here.
And believers more convinced than ever that we are not alone in our forests, providing us with straight-up proof. A security camera in the forests of Northern California captured something extraordinary at 2:47 a.m. on March 15, 2025. The footage reveals a massive figure emerging from the tree line, standing roughly 8 feet tall and covered in thick, dark hair. What makes this encounter particularly compelling is the creature's distinctive features. The shoulders span an incredible width, while the arms hang unnaturally low, extending well past the waist. The head displays that characteristic cone shape we've seen in other encounters, balanced on what appears to be an extremely thick, muscular neck. The movement pattern is unlike anything we'd expect from a human or known primate. So what are we looking at? The Henderson family had been experiencing strange phenomena for weeks leading up to this sighting. They reported hearing mysterious knocking sounds echoing through the night, heavy footsteps circling their remote cabin, and discovering massive handprints smeared across their windows each morning. They couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. But what truly sets this footage apart is the creature's behavior. This isn't just a brief glimpse of something passing through. For nearly 3 full minutes, the figure remains completely motionless, methodically tilting its head as if studying every detail of the cabin structure. The level of intelligence and curiosity displayed is genuinely unsettling. Then, without warning, it simply vanishes back into the darkness. No sound, no disturbance of the surrounding vegetation. Just an eerie silence and countless unanswered questions about what the Henderson family truly encountered that night. Why watch so closely, and what did it want? If the Henderson family's footage showed a creature studying a remote cabin, the next case suggests that the same calculated behavior is no longer confined to the wilderness. What happens when that watchful presence follows people right to their very front doors? However, one of the most chilling encounters of 2025 didn't happen deep in some remote forest. It occurred right in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Spokane, Washington. May 22, 2025, at 11:43 p.m. The Martinez family was fast asleep when their motion sensors activated. The security camera flickered on, and what stepped into frame left everyone stunned. A massive figure, nearly 8 feet tall, with reddish-brown hair. The shoulders were so broad, they practically filled the entire doorway. But here's what makes this footage absolutely terrifying. The creature's behavior was completely deliberate and methodical. This wasn't some confused animal that had wandered into human territory by accident. Every movement suggested intentional reconnaissance. For over 4 minutes, this thing stood just feet from the front door, systematically moving its head from side to side, as if cataloging every detail of the house's layout. The most disturbing part? It appeared to be testing the door handle, gently manipulating it as though trying to determine whether the entrance was secured. The implications are bone-chilling. What would have happened if that door had been unlocked? This wasn't some isolated wilderness encounter. This was a family home in suburban Spokane, complete with street lights and neighbors just yards away. The question that haunts investigators is whether these creatures are becoming bolder in their interactions with humans, or if their natural habitat is shrinking so dramatically that our worlds are inevitably colliding. What happened outside their home suggested intent, a presence studying its surroundings with patience. Weeks later in the Cascades, it would happen again, this time tracked not by door cameras, but by military-grade thermal optics in the dead of night. Deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state, thermal imaging technology captured what could be one of the most scientifically compelling Bigfoot evidence ever recorded. On June 8, 2025, a team of wildlife researchers conducting a nocturnal elk migration study documented something that has baffled them. The encounter occurred at 2:15 a.m. at an elevation of 4,200 feet. The research team had positioned their thermal equipment to track elk movement patterns, but instead recorded a massive heat signature moving purposefully through the dense forest. What appeared on screen was absolutely unmistakable. A bipedal figure standing nearly 8.5 feet tall, radiating heat like a living furnace against the cold mountain air. But this wasn't just about size and shape. The thermal readout revealed biological functions that would be impossible to fake. The creature's core temperature was running significantly hot, with extremities cooling in precise patterns that indicated active blood flow regulation. No costume or prop could possibly mimic this level of physiological detail. Every few seconds, visible plumes of breath appeared on the thermal display, regular, controlled, and undeniably alive. The stride analysis was equally remarkable. Each step covered approximately 6 feet, with weight distribution patterns far beyond anything humanly possible. The figure moved with incredible purpose, effortlessly clearing fallen logs and dense brush without a single stumble or hesitation. How does something that massive navigate through pitch-black forest terrain with such precision? The recording continued for a total of 12 minutes. This wasn't some blurry glimpse or fleeting shadow. This was sustained documentation of a creature displaying body heat, respiratory patterns, and apparent awareness that defies conventional explanation. The evidence raises one critical question that skeptics have yet to answer. If this footage was somehow fabricated, how do you fake active body heat, controlled breathing patterns, and intelligent awareness in the middle of a remote mountain wilderness at 2 a.m.? This footage hinted at a lone being moving with calculated strength through the night. However, the next footage didn't capture an isolated figure, but a group moving together with patterns that suggested something far more organized. Olympic Peninsula, Washington, July 14, 2025. A trail camera set to follow elk migrations captured something entirely unexpected, a sequence that would challenge every assumption about what truly moves through these forests. As dawn light filtered across a remote meadow, 3 distinct figures emerged from the tree line. The largest stood close to 9 feet tall. Beside it moved a smaller frame, approximately 7 feet in height, with noticeably lighter coloring. But what made this encounter truly extraordinary was the third figure, a childlike form standing no taller than 4 feet. The behavior captured on this footage is absolutely remarkable. The smallest figure doesn't move in formation like the adults. Instead, it wanders freely, occasionally stumbling, and at one point appears to chase something unseen in the tall grass. Meanwhile, the 2 larger figures maintain constant vigilance, their heads continuously scanning the surrounding tree line, with shoulders squared in seemingly protective postures. What happened next sent chills down investigators' spines. When the juvenile wandered too far from the group, the tallest figure made an arm gesture, and the young one immediately returned to their side. The response was instant and natural, exactly what you'd expect from a family unit. The camera captured even more intimate moments that would be impossible to stage. A massive hand, easily as broad as a shovel, briefly rested on the smaller adult's shoulder in what appeared to be a guiding gesture. When the youngest stumbled, both adults immediately rushed to its side, steadying it before the group continued moving. The level of detail visible in this footage is unprecedented. The adults display distinctly different characteristics. The smaller figure has more refined facial features, while the juvenile clearly leans into both adults with the clumsy dependence typical of young offspring. For decades, researchers have debated whether Bigfoot exists as individual creatures. But this Olympic Peninsula footage raises the question: are we witnessing definitive proof that these creatures live in complex family structures, displaying the same protective instincts and social bonds we see in human families? This sequence showed a group moving with unmistakable intent, and days earlier in the Cascades, the presence revealed itself in the opposite way. Silent, fragmentary, watching from the tree line, and vanishing before anyone knew it was there. In a lake in the Cascades, Washington State, a lone fisherman set up a tripod to record the big bass he was hauling in, talking through the catch, hyped about its size, the camera rolling for nearly an hour as he worked the line and processed the fish at the water's edge. It was dated March 20th, 2025. Most of the footage is ordinary field video. The angler handling gear, the sun sliding behind ridge lines, water lapping at the shoreline. Then, about 40 minutes in, the frame briefly admits something else, only for a handful of seconds. At the far tree line between dark trunks and low branches, a pale vertical shape slips into view. A shoulder, the curve of a head, the faint suggestion of an arm moving behind brush. The figure is nearly indistinguishable, half hidden by shadows, seen only as a slow peak between two cedar trunks. Leaves shudder and a low rustle passes through the microphone. Then it moves away. The trees close over the gap, and the long clip continues as if nothing unusual occurred. The fisherman never looks up and never interrupts his narration. He keeps joking about the bass, shows off a few other catches, then signs off and ends the recording. Only later at home does he notice it, freezing the playback on those seconds where something was clearly peering from the forest. He rewinds, slows the frame, and the same brief glimpse repeats. An unmistakable verticality, a slow retreat into the undergrowth. Online reaction was immediate and divided. Many viewers called the clip an obvious stunt, pointing to the angle, the lighting, and the campsite's popularity, with weekend thrill seekers as evidence of a planted costume or staged prank. Others argued that the partial view, the natural motion of foliage, and the lack of dramatic reaction from the fisherman suggested authenticity. Several commenters claiming credentials in wildlife biology and video forensics weighed in, some skeptical, some supportive. Some mentioned that the upload noted there were no clear edits and that the motion blur and sensor noise were consistent with low-light, long-take smartphone footage. For now, the long recording stands mostly as ordinary lake footage, interrupted by a few seconds of something that refuses to be fully seen or fully explained. Visible enough to spark argument, but too indistinct to settle it. At the lake, it lingered only for a moment, half hidden in the trees, more suggestion than proof. But in Montana, it came out of the dark with such violence that a steel machine buckled, hinting at what it could do to us. Deep in rural Montana, powerful floodlights illuminated a construction clearing where heavy machinery was carving into the forest edge. Beyond the harsh ring of artificial light, the tree line appeared silent and undisturbed until something massive emerged from the darkness. At 1:22 a.m. on August 3, 2025, the excavator's mounted security camera captured what investigators would later describe as some of the most unsettling construction site footage ever recorded. The video was grainy, distorted by motion blur, and yet, within its shaky frames, a massive form could be seen crossing into the light. Only fragments were visible, an arm sweeping past the lens, a shoulder wider than the cab door, a leg moving with weight. What stood out most wasn't what was seen, but what couldn't be. The figure never came fully into view, always slipping just beyond clarity. The machine's operator didn't notice at first. The recording shows the excavator subtly shifting, steel joints groaning as if under strain. Then, a shadow pressed against the hydraulic arm, large hands, or what seemed like them, flattening against metal. For several seconds, the excavator rocked visibly on its treads, its cab trembling under immense weight. The camera crackled with static during the contact, obscuring key details. Viewers who studied the footage described brief glints, light catching on thick matted hair, a shape bending unnaturally close to the cab glass, eyeshine flickering in the glare. But no single frame offered confirmation. It was all partial glimpses, blurred edges, and silhouettes that suggested something enormous circling just beyond the limits of certainty. Then came the sound. A deafening metallic crack rang out as the side panel of the excavator caved inward. The recording jolts at that moment, the image smearing into streaks of light before stabilizing again. When it does, the figure is already retreating into the tree line. Work at the site ceased momentarily, but was resumed after a month. The excavator still bears the deep, unexplainable dent, steel warped inward by force no man could have applied. In Montana, the encounter came from the tree line, a force circling just beyond the reach of floodlights. But in Idaho, it surfaced from the depths, proving these creatures aren't bound to land at all, but command the water with equal mastery. At a depth of 45 feet in Crystal Lake in northern Idaho, underwater cameras positioned during September 12, 2025 for trout population studies suddenly shuddered as a massive shadow entered the field of view. What emerged from the murky depths defied all expectations. Broad shoulders, elongated limbs, and unmistakably bipedal movement in an environment where no known primate should be able to survive. The figure crouched near the lake bottom, yet even in this position clearly stood over 8 feet tall. Its arms swept through the water with wide, perfectly controlled strokes, while its legs adjusted like natural rudders. Nothing about the movement appeared frantic or desperate. Thick hair rippled around the creature's entire frame, dense enough to suggest natural insulation against the frigid mountain water. But here's what left marine biologists absolutely stunned. No air bubbles escaped from the figure, and it showed no signs of respiratory distress. The timestamp revealed an incredible 8 minutes of continuous submersion without once surfacing for air. The creature's behavior underwater was equally remarkable. It bent low, using massive hands to methodically roll rocks and stir up sediment in what appeared to be a search pattern. When those enormous fingers suddenly closed around something, a silver flash was briefly visible, likely a trout. At one point, the figure seemed to hover motionlessly before shifting out of the camera's range. Sediment clouds trailed behind it as it moved through the water with unexpected speed and control. For marine biologists studying the footage and some online speculation, the shock isn't just the sighting itself, it's the incredible adaptability this suggests. A creature traditionally associated with dense forest environments moving through deep water, as if lakes were second nature, raises profound questions about their true capabilities. Local Native American tribes have spoken of water spirits for countless generations, beings that move seamlessly between forest and lake environments. Watching this Crystal Lake footage, those ancient stories suddenly feel less like mythology and more like preserved memory. Could waterways actually serve as hidden transportation routes for these beings? Is this how they've managed to remain undetected for so long, using underwater passages that humans almost never monitor? But if in Idaho it slipped beneath the surface, vanishing into silt and silence, this time in California it tore free of cover, striding onto open asphalt and into human sight. An officer's headlights cut through the empty stretch of road on Highway 101 in Northern California. Then, something massive appeared at the edge of the beam. It wasn't a deer or a bear, just the upper body of a towering, fur-covered figure, frozen in place for the briefest instant before the car passed. The dashcam clip is shaky and blurred, dated January 27, 2025, and lasting less than 10 seconds. But even so, the sheer size and upright stance are impossible to dismiss. According to the officer, he immediately pulled over and turned the cruiser around to aim his spotlight back toward the shoulder where he thought he'd seen it. But the road was empty. No movement, no sound. As evident from his body cam footage, for several minutes, he scanned the forest's edge, expecting eyeshine or some sign of retreat, but nothing appeared. The dash cam recorded his return to the spot and the spotlight cutting into trees that revealed nothing. When the footage was later reviewed, wildlife specialists pointed out that the outline didn't match known animals in the region. Skeptics argued it could be a trick of perspective, shadows warping as the patrol car moved at speed. Cryptozoologists, however, called it one of the most compelling roadside encounters in years, noting the figure's apparent mass and upright posture. Online, the clip ignited immediate debate. Some viewers claimed they could see the swing of an arm as the figure slipped out of frame, while others dismissed it as headlights catching a tree trunk. The officer's calm but unsettled narration on the dashcam audio only added to the tension, convincing many that what he saw was genuine. What remains is only those few seconds of footage, a blurred outline against the headlights, a partial glimpse of something that seemed far too large to explain. Investigators still debate whether it was simply an illusion of speed and shadow, or whether a patrol officer on Highway 101 truly brushed past something we are not meant to understand. On that California highway, it slipped away, leaving only blurred footage and unanswered doubts. In the forests of Canada, it revealed something far more unsettling. It lashed out, striking the machine that tried to track it. September 15th, 2025. Deep in the remote wilderness of British Columbia, wildlife photographer Marcus Chen deployed his quadcopter drone for what should have been a routine elk population survey. Instead, his camera captured a fleeting figure moving upright between the cedars, massive, dark, and far too tall to be mistaken for a bear. For only a few seconds, the drone's feed showed its shoulders slipping through the trees before the figure disappeared beneath the canopy. As seen in the footage, Chen adjusted altitude, circling the area in search of whatever he had seen. The drone's camera swept across moss-draped branches and shadowed undergrowth, but the clearing remained empty. Then, just at the edge of the frame, something sudden and fast closed in from the periphery. A heavy object, likely a stone, struck the drone with force. The camera jolted violently, static filled the feed, and within seconds, the aircraft spiraled down. The last frame showed blurred forest rushing upward before the image cut to black. When the footage surfaced online, reaction was immediate. Some viewers insisted the strike confirmed intelligence, arguing no animal throws objects with intent. Others dismissed it as staged, pointing out how easy it is to simulate impact with editing tricks. Chen, however, released the drone's telemetry logs, showing abrupt mechanical failure immediately after the collision. Experts weighed in with cautious observations. A primatologist noted that great apes in the wild occasionally hurl stones at perceived threats, suggesting the act, if genuine, was consistent with higher-level cognition. A drone engineer confirmed the strike was external, not mechanical, but declined to speculate further. Could an unknown species really possess the awareness to target technology so precisely? In the forests of British Columbia, the camera was silenced mid-flight. In Alaska, the storm itself carried out the same erasure, leaving only the suggestion of a figure against the snow. For less than a minute, the weather station's feed in Denali National Park, Alaska, showed a figure moving against the wind on the 7th of January, 2025. Pale hair contrasted faintly against the whiteout, and its outline was unmistakably humanoid. Then a gust swept through, covering the lens in blowing powder and rendering the image useless. When the view cleared seconds later, the space where the figure had been was empty. Online debate was immediate following the day the footage was shared. Some insisted that it showed nothing more than drifting snow distorted by low resolution, while others argued the shape was too consistent, the signature broad shoulders, swinging arms, and a stride that cut through waist-deep drifts without faltering. A handful of commenters claiming to be experts dismissed it as pareidolia, the psychological tendency to perceive familiar patterns, while self-described video analysts countered that the feed bore no signs of editing and carried authentic depth blur from the storm itself. But could a being adapted to these brutal conditions have remained hidden for this long? Believers pointed out that the brevity of the sighting made fakery less likely, noting that hoaxes usually exaggerate and linger. Skeptics replied that its very shortness made it useless as evidence. What both sides found striking was the timing. an automated camera running in an uninhabited stretch of parkland, catching only seconds of something it was never designed to record. Alaska's camera recorded only a few seconds before the figure moved out of frame, leaving the frozen landscape eerily still. Meanwhile, in Oregon, the campground footage caught something crossing the tree line with a stride too fast, too deliberate, and far too large to ignore. In Oregon, a popular campground near the base of the Cascades had gone quiet for the night, save for the muffled conversation between two campers sharing a tent-side drink. During that 16th night of May this year, one of their phones was already out filming the campfire for a social media post. Then, something shifted at the edge of the tree line. The clip shows less than 10 seconds of motion. A tall shape crosses between two pines, the stride oddly smooth and upright. A faint reflection from the phone's light glints for a moment, then the figure disappears into shadow, leaving only the sound of crackling wood. Almost immediately, online viewers questioned the authenticity. The timing struck many as too convenient. A phone already recording, the subject framed neatly in view, and the sighting taking place in a campground, notorious for Bigfoot tourism. Several commenters pointed out that the proportions looked suspiciously like a man in padded clothing, the exaggerated swing of the arms resembling costume design more than natural movement. And yet, a smaller group argued otherwise. They noted the way the silhouette seemed to maintain balance on uneven ground, its outline bulkier than any ordinary camper. A few self-identified wildlife experts chimed in, claiming that while the footage was poor quality, the shoulder width and gait did not match a human frame. If it was staged, why keep it so brief? Barely long enough to process before it was gone. Skeptics countered that very brevity could be part of the trick. Grainy, dark footage leaves room for suggestion, and hoaxes thrive on what cannot be clearly seen. One alleged video analyst insisted the clip was textbook low-light manipulation, adding that the lack of additional angles or follow-up made it more of a curiosity than evidence. The campers described the moment afterwards as unsettling in its silence. There was no crashing, no obvious animal movement, only the impression of something that appeared just long enough to be noticed before fading back into the trees. The location only fueled debate further. The Cascades have a long history of claimed sightings, drawing tourists, researchers, and hoaxers alike. Some online threads dismissed the video outright as part of that culture, a prank meant to go viral in a familiar setting. Others held on to the idea that hoaxes usually overplay their hand, while this one left only questions. That night, it slipped silently across a campground, barely seen. Now, months later, it crossed a game trail in the dark, moving with the same unnerving purpose before disappearing without a trace. July 6, 2025. Near the tree line of Mount Hood, Oregon, a pair of hunters had set up a trail camera aimed at a game path known for elk movement. At 3:14 a.m., the camera triggered. For just 6 seconds, the infrared feed recorded something upright moving through the frame. The figure passed behind thin branches, its outline clear enough to show long arms hanging lower than expected. The head tilted once toward the camera, and for 2 frames, a single eye reflected white in the infrared. The stride was fast but heavy, each step carrying it further across the shot than a human would cover. The legs bent deeply, almost exaggerated, before straightening again. Then it was gone. Only the empty path remained, brush moving where it had passed. When the footage appeared online, defenders immediately pushed back against claims of fakery. They argued the eye glint couldn't have been staged, pointing out that a taped reflector or flashlight would have bounced light differently under infrared. Others highlighted how the figure's steps didn't match human stride length, noting that each pace covered far too much ground for someone in boots. What stood out most in the debate was the movement itself, smooth, steady, and unwavering, without the awkward pauses people expect when someone is faking. Commenters emphasized how the branches in the foreground distorted the outline just slightly, something they claimed would be nearly impossible to replicate with CGI or a suit. Others pointed out the timing, a random trail camera in the middle of the night catching a figure that doesn't linger, doesn't perform for the lens, and vanishes in seconds. For many, those small details made the clip feel less like a prank and more like an accidental glimpse of something not meant to be seen. Thanks for watching. If this compilation of Bigfoot found footage piqued your interest, click here for more.